Last year, I reviewed the Zeapon Micro 2 slider, which was my favorite camera accessory of the whole 2019. And today, I have another new product from Zeapon that I'm doing a review on, and that is the new Micro 2 E800 slider. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at a new product from Zeapon, and this is their new Micro 2 E800 slider. And they actually are releasing 4 new products at the same time. The E800, M800, E600 and M600. The E800 and the E600, they are the motorized slider like this one here. And then the M800 and the M600 is pretty much the same as the E version, but those are the manual slider. And the difference between the 800 and the 600 is the 800 is the biggest one, and as you can see, this is the E800. If you compare it with the original Micro 2, I have it here. This is the original Micro 2, and if I put it side by side, you can see that the original Micro 2 is quite a bit smaller, or I should say the new E800 is quite a bit bigger than the original Micro 2. So the original Micro 2, the motorized version, is 41 centimeter long, and the new E800 is 61 centimeter long. And the size of the E600 is 51 cm long, which is just exactly between the original Micro 2 and the E800. That means Zeapon is now making a total of 6 different sliders. 3 of them are manual and 3 of them are motorized. Unfortunately, the motorized module for the original Micro 2 doesn't work on the new longer slider, and even the one for the E800 is not exactly the same as the one for the E600. And the reason is that with the original Micro 2, if you look at the bottom, it is pretty much a flat panel at the bottom, while the one for the E800 and the 600, if you look at the bottom, actually if you can see it clearly, it is not completely flat. It's because both the new 600 and 800 series sliders, they use a balancing wheel on each side of the slider to help to maintain the slider a little bit more, which is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in this review. But because of that, the bottom of the motorized module has a slightly different design, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but I think that's a trade-off that Zeapon made when they designing the new longer sliders. The motorized module doesn't have any lock for the battery, so it's quite easy to knock the battery out from the unit, so be careful when you're using it. The new low-profile stand is made of carbon fiber, and it's a very nice quality carbon fiber as well. Unlike the original Micro 2, which you can buy the optional Easy Lock, which is detachable, so you don't have to attach onto it if you don't want to have it. But with the new E800 or 600 or the M600, M800, the bottom low-profile mount is part of the slider because this is part of the design to create extra support for the much bigger slider. Okay, now let's talk about how to set up this slider and some of the basic features first. Now, first thing, this E800 slider, because it already comes with the low profile stand attached to it, so if you want, you can just set it up and put it on the desk and shoot just like that. So what you need to do is first just extend the 4 little legs here, and also unfold the last bit here. And then you can now put it onto a flat surface like this. Now, one thing I noticed immediately if you have watched my previous first look unboxing video is the base of the new E800 or 600 series slider. It is much longer compared to the original Micro 2. If you look at it, this base is now pretty long. If you compare it with the original Micro 2, you can see that the Easy Lock 2 is only like half the length of the slider. So in my original Micro 2 review, I have mentioned that what it means is if you put a heavy camera on top, and even if you fully extend and unfold all the arms, it's still quite easy to tip over because the base that stand is just not wide enough. But with the new E800 or E600, it is much wider, so it just gives you a much more stable platform for you to use. Even if you have a much heavier camera, it's not really a problem anymore. And next, what you need to do is just put a tripod head onto the slider. Okay, mount it up there and then put the camera on top. And then the battery. And the first thing you should do is make sure the slider is back to the center position, because there's a very important step that you need to do first before you start actually using the slider. Alright, so it's pretty much at the center. Now what you need to do is that on each side of the slider, there's a little tab here on this side and that side. So what you need to do is to loosen up the tab on each side. And the reason is there is a balancing wheel on each side of the slider. So when you loosen it up, then it will calibrate the height of those wheels, and then you can just tighten it up again. Now one little problem that I had with the tab on this side is that because this is the motorized version, so we have the motor here, it makes it a bit tricky to for you to put your finger underneath there to tighten it up. It's definitely doable, but it could be a little bit tricky. So okay, now once you tighten up both the tabs on both sides, and the slider is now ready to use. The way to use this slider is pretty much the same as the original Micro 2. So first thing is press this power button here to turn on the slider, and now you can press the power button again to toggle the speed. There are 3 different speeds that you can toggle between. You can see there's a blue light here. The fastest is when there's 3 lights, so this is the fastest. And you can press again and change it to the slowest. So at the slowest setting, you can't really hear the motor noise at all. Let me try to move it and then I will shut up and let you listen to the motor noise. You probably couldn't hear anything because I can't hear anything. I can hear the fan from my laptop a lot louder compared to the noise from the slider. And if I change the speed to the medium, I can now hear a little bit of noise, but it's still not really loud at all. Instead of just relying on you manually press the left and right button at the top of the slider to move it, what you can do is you can set the start and end point of the slider by first move it to the position you want, and then you can double tap the power button. You hear the beep, it means it's set the start point, and then you move to the other position where you want it to end, for example. And let's say you want to stop here, and then you stop here, and then you double tap the power button again. So you hear the double beep, that means it's set the end point. And now you can double tap on the power button and you will go from the end point to the start point, or you can double tap again and go from the start point to the end point. And if you want, you can also get the slider to just keep running in the looping mode. This is a new feature that Zeapon recently added while a firmware update to the original Micro 2. So of course, this new slider also has the same feature. And what you need to do is, after you set the start and end point, you press the this direction button and then the power button at the same time. And that will enable the looping feature, and you can see that it will just go between the start and end point continuously until you want it to stop again. And also when it's in the looping mode, you can also change the speed of the slider by just pressing the power button. So you can go through one of the 3 different speed settings if you want to change the speed of how it goes between the start and end point. But just like the original Micro 2, there are some more advanced features that you can do if you download the app and install it on your smartphone. It supports both iOS and Android. With the app, you can do many different things. For example, you can now set up multiple waypoints and also set up different speed between each of the waypoint. There is a time-lapse mode. You can set up the slider to help you to take some time-lapse video. And there are more features that will be available in the future once Zeapon releases the other module that can work with this slider together. So yeah, you can use the app to do the more advanced feature, but you can also just use the slider itself, having the flexibility that allow you to either just use the slider or use the smartphone to control it. I think that is a big selling point of this Zeapon slider. Zeapon claims the maximum payload for this E800 slider when it's in a horizontal orientation is 8 kg, and in the vertical orientation, the maximum payload is 3.5 kg. To see whether that maximum 3.5 kg vertical payload is true or not, I grabbed the heaviest camera that I have with me, which is the Panasonic Lumix S1H, with a lens, with battery, and also a cage, and I also use one of the heaviest tripod head that I have. So altogether it is 3.45 kg, which is just under the limit, and with that attached to the E800 slider, and I have the slider in the vertical orientation, the slider can handle that setup no problem. But having said that, I then changed the lens to one that is a little bit heavier, so the total weight is just over 3.5 kg, and with that then the slider can no longer take it up vertically, but it does prove that the maximum 3.5 kg vertical payload is correct. The new 600 and 800 series slider has many cool new features which I'm going to talk about next, but I think the biggest reason why someone would want to pick this instead of the original Micro 2 is the total travel distance is quite a bit longer than the original Micro 2. The original Micro 2, the total travel distance is 54 centimeters, which is not too bad at all for such a small slider because of its double sliding design, so that it can go a lot longer than the other slider of a similar size. But with the new 800 slider, the total travel distance is now 94 centimeters, which is almost 1 meter. That is very long for a slider, although it is much bigger than the Micro 2. It is still pretty small slider, but it can go 94 centimeters. That is almost 1 meter. And with the 600 series slider, the travel distance is pretty much exactly between the original Micro 2 and the 800. The total travel distance is 74 centimeters, which is also pretty long. If you want to do some time-lapse video or do some video outdoor, the new 600 or 800 series slider could be the much better choice for you. But on the other hand, I have to say the weight of the new slider, especially this biggest E800, is quite a bit heavier and also bigger than the original Micro 2. As I mentioned before, there are some cool new features that comes with the new sliders, and let me show you the first one. Now, part of the stand, if I fold the leg like this, and now put them back like this, and make sure the legs are straight. Okay, now you may have seen already there are wheels on each side of the leg, and so if you turn it like this, the slider become a little dolly so that you can slide the slider around like this for some nice smooth dolly shots. And you can also turn the wheels in different way for different kind of effect. For example, you can turn the wheels like this, Now my desk is actually not that big, so it's a bit hard for me to demo it to you, but yeah, you can see now I can push the slider in the other orientation, and I can also angle the wheels in other way, for example like this, and that means I can move the slider like this. So yeah, there are many different ways that you can use the wheels to help you to create some more creative shots using this slider. The only issues that I have with these wheels is because they are quite small. So if you put it on a very flat surface, like for example this desk here, that's no problem, it can move very smoothly. But if you try to put it, for example, on the outdoor ground, even if it looks relatively flat, it wouldn't really work quite well because of the wheels are just too small, and also it's too hard. So any kind of bumpy surface wouldn't allow the slider to move very smoothly. So I think it will be good maybe in the future that Zeapon can create some maybe bigger wheels that you can swap out to if you want to use it outdoor. That could be a pretty useful upgrade for this slider. And the other pretty cool new feature is that Zeapon has also released a suction cup for the slider. So if you get those suction cups, and you can mount it onto each of the leg here, you just need to remove this end bit here, and then you can attach the suction cup onto the end of the leg. And if you do that, you can attach it to all four ends of it, and then you can attach the slider onto some flat surface. For example, you can attach the slider onto some window so that you can use it to create some shot that normally you can't do with a tripod, or you can attach it to the bonnet of the car, and that help you to create some nice shot from outside the car. So there are tons of flexibility that you can do with the slider because of the suction cups. And another thing I have noticed is that because the design of the leg for the new slider is pretty much the same as the leg on the Easy Lock 2, that means the suction cup design for the new slider and also the wheels, actually it can also be used on the original Easy Lock 2. So you can buy the suction cup and put it on the original Easy Lock 2 if you already have one, and also the wheels as well, and that can also extend the functionality and the flexibility how you can use your original Easy Lock 2 if you have already bought one. And next I'm going to show you how to mount it onto a tripod, because there is a few more little steps that you need to do if you want to use the slider on the tripod, but it is a little bit small here in my room here. So let's go outside, and then I will show you how to mount it and use it, set up the slider on a tripod. The first thing we need to do is to put this slider onto the tripod. The base of the slider, it used the standard QR plate. So if your tripod using the normal standard QR plate, you can just directly mount it onto the tripod. But if it doesn't, it also have the tripod mount at the bottom, so that you can just screw on your tripods that plate onto the base on the slider, and then you can then put it onto the tripod. So first thing, make sure it's secure, because it's quite a heavy slider, so make sure it's good. The next thing is to use this nunchuck. Okay, so this is not really a nunchuck, but this is to provide a 4-point support for the slider here, because if you have watched my the Micro 2 slider review, one thing I mentioned is because this slider is designed to be like very compact and easy to carry around. So instead of using two tripod or two light stand like most of the other slider to create a very stable support, it using only one tripod, just like this one. But the problem is that if you put a heavy camera onto the slider, and once you fully extend the slider to either side, because the weight distribution, it may create a bit of flex, and it just would tilt the whole slider a little bit. And now with this E800, because it's much longer, so the amount of tilting created by the weight on one side of the slider would be even bigger. So Zeapon, they create a pretty good and clever solution is to add additional support using your tripod and then mount it onto the slider, and that would give you much more stable, the overall system will be much more stable compared to not using this at all. So to install it, there are two mount here at the bottom, and you just mount it onto your tripod. It may take a bit of time, especially the first time you tried it, because it's not super easy to do that, but after a few practice, then it is actually okay. Now one key thing that is pretty important is that you have to make sure the two mounting points onto the tripod is as flat as possible. What I mean is, like, try to make sure they are level if possible, and that will give you a much more stable connection once you have everything hooked up. Alright, let's see it. Now it's a bit far away, but the good thing is this is extendable, so I extend it here and I mount it here. So that's what I like to do, just have everything connected, and then you can try to adjust it a little bit, because it might be hard to know exactly what is the optimum height of the connection and other things. So I just put everything in together. And lock these two sides so that it wouldn't come loose. And now I can do a little more adjustment to the height and everything. Just make sure it's as optimal as possible. This step definitely would take a little bit of time, and I also highly recommend you take as much time as possible when you are adjusting it, because it really affects how stable the whole system is. Make sure you tighten every single joint, because there are quite a few of them. And now the whole thing is very stable. So the next thing, put the camera onto it. And I have a pretty heavy camera setup here. This is the S1H with the cage, and also I have the hologram Mars X here. So it's a pretty heavy camera setup. And now I have the slider, which is right at the center position, because the next step before I start to use it is that I need to readjust the balancing wheel on both sides, just like what I did before. And so I just need to loosen up both sides and make sure I then tighten it up so that it will calibrate the height of those two balancing wheels and make sure they are good. And now the whole slider is ready for you to use. And as you can probably see, the slider, the whole setup is very stable even with such a heavy camera on top of the slider, even when it's fully extended to this side, which is the more unbalancing side because the motor is on this side. So even when it's fully extended, you can see there is no tilt. There's virtually no tilt at all when it's fully extended, and that's because of these two supporting rod, which create like a 4-point structure that make the whole slider very stable. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is that you can also tilt the slider, but you need to do a bit of adjustment. So let me take the camera off first. You shouldn't be doing any adjustment with the camera attached on it. So if I want to tilt the camera, so first thing is I would need to disconnect these two rods at the top. And now I can slide it to one side. Alright, like for example, you want to tilt it this way. So I just need one of those. And I do pretty much the same thing. And now the slider is tilted and I can put the camera back on and then I can use the slider again. So yeah, just double check, make sure all the connections are as solid and as stable as possible before you put the camera back onto the slider. With that new 4-point nunchuck setup, the E800, when you mount it on the tripod, even when you have a heavy camera attached to it, is very solid, it's rock solid. The only issue that I notice is that when you move the slider all the way to the edge, I noticed that at one certain point, the slider itself, there will be a tiny up or down movement, depends on how you move it, and that does cause a little kind of bumpy movement in the footage that you shot if you are shooting with a telephoto lens. If you are shooting with a wide angle lens, and especially if you have the image stabilization turned on, you probably wouldn't notice it. But if you are shooting with a telephoto lens, then that is something that you have to be careful about. But that is the only issue that I found with the setup. Otherwise, the whole setup is super solid even when I have a heavy camera loaded onto it. When Zeapon told me that they are going to release a new longer slider a couple of months ago, at that time I thought they are just making it just longer but pretty much exactly the same. So when they finally showed me some photos and video of the final products, I was actually quite surprised because the new 800 and 600 series slider is definitely a lot more than just a bigger Micro 2 slider. And that also makes me really waiting for the other module that they are developing right now, the panning module and the other module, because it will turn the slider into a pretty nice ecosystem that is very versatile. So should you buy this new E800 or the 600 compared to the original Micro 2? I guess the answer really depends on your usage. I remember when I showed the original Micro 2 to a few of my videographer or even photographer friends, they like the slider, the design and feature and how compact it is, but they told me the distance that you can travel is just not long enough for the kind of video or the time-lapse video that they normally shoot. So they didn't buy the original Micro 2 for that reason. So if you're one of the person who need a long travel distance, the new E800 and 600 slider is definitely much better than the original Micro 2, but you do have to pay the extra price. And I'm not just talking about the actual retail price of the slider, which is more expensive than the original Micro 2, but what I'm talking about is that it is quite a bit bigger, so you definitely can't easily fit it into a small camera bag. Carry it around is heavier, and also set up on a tripod would require quite a bit more time to set up because you need to set up that 4-point nunchuck system, which with the original Micro 2 you don't have to do that. And also every time you finish a shot you have to take it apart. You don't have to take it apart completely if you want to, but it still takes more time to set up and tear it down. So with the original Micro 2, I can easily just walk around, set up and take some shots very quickly. This will be much harder with the new bigger slider. I guess that's why Zeapon has expanded their product lineup to have 6 different sliders, because there really isn't a perfect slider for everyone. But now you have the choice to pick the one that is the most perfect for you.